We're all good to go. Great stuff. Okay, I'll declare open this public hearing of the Senate Rural and Regional Affairs and Transport References Committee. The committee is hearing evidence for its inquiry into the importance of a viable, safe, sustainable and efficient road transport industry. I do welcome everyone here today. This is a public hearing and a Hansard transcript of proceedings is being made. Before the committee starts taking evidence, I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence that they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It's also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence to a committee. The committee prefers all evidence to be given in public, but under the Senate's resolutions, witnesses have the right to request to be heard in private session. It is important that witnesses give the committee notice if they intend to ask to give evidence in camera. If a witness objects to answering a question, the witness should state the ground upon which objection is taken. The committee will determine whether it will insist on an answer having regard to the ground that is claimed. If the committee determines to insist on an answer, a witness may request the answer be given in camera. Such a request may, of course, also be made at any other time. If you agree to provide an answer to a question taken on notice during the hearing, please note that answers are due by close of business, Friday, 7th of August, 2020. Now, I remind everyone in the hearing room to ensure their mobile phones are either turned off or switched to silent, please. Finally, on behalf of the committee, I would like to thank all those who have made submissions and sent representatives here today. Now, may I welcome Mr. Robert Bell. So, Rob, for the purposes of Hansard, if you could please state your name and the capacity that you appear today, please.
My name is Robert Bell, and I'm a truck driver advocate for the transport industry.
Thank you, Rob. Now, before I go any further, there is some filming going on, and firstly, I would consult with my co-chair if the senators have any objection to any filming. But thank you, Senator McDonald. But more importantly, to the witnesses. Now, Mr. Bell or Robert, if you don't want to be filmed, it is your desire not to be. You let me know. Otherwise, we will allow filming to happen.
My I guess, objection to that is I don't have control where that video is posted online, and one of the points I'm going to make to the committee in my representation is, for instance, last time you'll remember we spoke at an impromptu sort of thing over at BP, and that was posted online, and I was actually sacked because I had spoken out about conditions in the transport industry. So the adverse action, even speaking in this inquiry today, even though the protections supposedly afforded by appearing here, in reality, the way that the transport industry at the moment, it's a risky proposition.
All right, what we'll do, Rob, sorry mate, because I want to hear everything you got out today. That's good enough, that's a no, sorry mate. And then we'll ask each witness as we go. Now, as I said, Rob, please opening statement, and you tell us everything you need to get out, and then we'll go to questions.
Okay. I'm going to start by just reading an article that that was published in a transport magazine some years ago, immediately after the demise of the RSO order, and which I feel is quite relevant to the transport industry today. And it starts out by saying that Rob Bell believes that the Safe Rates RSO order was the best chance Australia had to make the transport industry more equitable. And with the federal elections back then around the corner, and the views within the transport industry still largely polarised with regards to the need for a road safety remuneration tribunal, the debate on the future of the tribunal and its minimum rates order is expected to heat up again. The magazine, ATN, spoke with me, and at the time I was an employee driver working for a New South Wales-based transport company, who believed that the RSRT must be reinstated to ensure a safe and equitable transport industry in Australia. So just on that point, I make this submission and all my submissions purely from the basis I'm an employed driver. I've never been an owner driver, never intend to be an owner driver. This is entirely from an employed driver's perspective. And it goes on to say that I've been associated with the Australian transport sector for almost 30 years at the time. And during that period, I'd worked in the fuel and bulk haulage sectors and driven road trains in Western Australia and Northern Territory also. And I'd also had a decade where I'd spent in the UK working in the criminal justice field, so a bit of a a bit of a break from the industry, but I've come back to Australia after about 10 years ago or so. So I highlighted how the Contractor Driver Minimum Payments Road Safety Remuneration Order 2016 was designed to benefit just not contractor drivers, but employee drivers and transport companies as a whole. I said that owing to some ambiguity in the definition of the term contractor driver, it had largely been misinterpreted that the 2016 order was confined to individual independent contractors only. That, however, is incorrect, as it also affected all drivers employed by owner drivers as well as fleets. Employed drivers were also covered by the 2014 order. And the significance of that is the 2014 order gave power to the Fair Work Ombudsman to enforce orders, power that it never previously has and power that it no longer has. So under the sort of strata of the order, if it had still been enforced, if you were an employed driver and you were being underpaid, you could simply go to the Fair Work Ombudsman, show them proof that you're being underpaid, and they could make an order that it be rectified. As it stands now, there is no real regulation in that order, and companies have got carte blanche to pay basically whatever they like. And generally, if you complain about your wages or entitlements, that's usually the fastest way to the unemployment queue for most employed drivers. So I go on to say that the 2000 said the minimum rates order was the best chance Australia had in the past three decades to make the transport industry more equitable, i.e. fairer across the board. This in turn the 2016 order, if it had been applied as intended, would have finally given smaller operators the opportunity to compete on a more or less level playing field. This in turn would have reduced the financial pressures on them, as well as giving them some continuity of supply. So some security that they've got this work and they're doing it for a fair rate. They can pay their drivers a fair rate, and no one else can come in and cut, as a term in the industry is, cut the guts out of it and take it away from them, and then their drivers lose their income, the company loses its work, etc., etc. So while I do not believe that any one instrument could ensure road safety or reduce deaths, I said that the RSRT could have been one of the major stakeholders in a holistic approach to bringing about safety reform. So it's not just the only thing, but it would have been a thing that could have, like as I said, use the word holistic, that ensures that the whole transport industry operates safely, and that in turn operates that all road users are safer. Because there's one point I want to make here, is that the transport industry as a whole, it's fair to say it's not a mature enough industry to self-regulate. There has to be regulation to a degree, because we share the road with all other road users. And generally, if a car or caravan connects with a truck, whether it's whoever's fault it is, it's normally the smaller vehicle that comes off the worst. So we have to ensure that the job's done safely, and there's a whole range of issues. But at the moment, it's too enforcement based, where it's over-regulated, and then the regulation on the rates and the wages, there's no regulation at all. So there's an imbalance there. So the current state-based approach to heavy vehicle safety seems to be compliance and camera-based, while not addressing the underlying problems within the industry. So increasing the regulatory burden and the cost only increases the factor that the RSRO sought to address. There's now further compliance and regulatory costs, but the rates are contracting. So there's a smaller slice of the pie that you have to find all this money for, and there's less slice of that pie to pay your drivers or maintain your equipment. And I also went on to say that redirecting funds from the RSRT to the Heavy Vehicle National Regulator was counterproductive in some ways to the safety and compliance issue. The RSRT order was a federal law, while the Heavy Vehicle National Law and Regulator are state-based legislation and entities. So by diverting these funds, the federal government at the time appeared to be sending the message that some lives matter more than others in Australia, because the heavy vehicle national law is not applied throughout all Australian states and territories. So some states, I think you get my point on that. So the issue of so at the time, Western Australia, Northern Territory. So at this present time, I'll say Western Australia and Northern Territory don't have the heavy vehicle national law, and at the time I wrote this, the ACT didn't have it either. So at this present time, this so-called national law is not enforced in Western Australia or the Northern Territory. So the issue of lack of compliance is another huge problem in the industry. Rising costs and shrinking revenue forces drivers to spend more time on the road, which results in increased chance of accidents. It's simple. The more time you're on the road, the more chance you've got of having an accident. And with the abolition of the tribunal, there appears to be no legislative force behind the mandated enforcement of award conditions. And that's my point. Once that order was taken away, there's no mandated enforcement of awards anymore. So this leaves employed drivers in a virtual void with little chance of independently navigating the myriad of legislative roadblocks that exist in the federal industrial relations framework. Most drivers wouldn't even know how to access the Fair Work Commission website, let alone understand the legislation behind it. So the Fair Work Ombudsman at this point of time, which was when I wrote the article, but it's the same today, has no force in law and cannot do any more than voluntary consensual mediation for the recovery of underpaid wages and entitlements. And that consensual mediation implies no obligation on the employer to even attend. So they can say we'll mediate on this, but the employer can just ignore it and not even attend. So there's no mediation at all. So at the time I was a member of the Transport Workers Union, which I still am, and I acknowledge that the union's support to drivers and its efforts in getting awards enshrined in the Australian workplace. That's a given. Without unions, our conditions we have today wouldn't even be there now. However, I said at the time I was critical of the TW's primary spokesman, Tony Sheldon, and that I believe they erred in the promotion of the minimum rates order. I went on to say that although the union was right in highlighting the intrinsic link between road safety and freight rates, it did not highlight how the order was designed to bring about incentive to make owners and employing drivers work that little bit extra. Sorry, I'll just go back. So how the order was designed to bring about other operational improvements within the transport sector. Just having a fatigued driver on the road is potentially an accident waiting to happen, and having the weight of financial pressure on your shoulders is an extra incentive to make owners and employed drivers work that little bit extra than would normally be prudent. So the effect of that is drivers have to work and companies have to have their trucks on the road more to just keep their heads above, and all that adds up to the fatigue parcel. So I went on to say that the TW seemed to be focused more on the main message than trying to explain the individual nuances of the order, which then led to what I'll go on to say now. So if it had been explained more adequately to the masses, and perhaps a greater overall understanding could have been achieved. I also said that most of the drivers and mum and dad businesses that campaigned against the order were ill-informed of the effects of the order, which was designed to benefit them as well as contractor drivers. They were acting on the basis of information received by social media, press releases and advice from industry associations. To my knowledge, not one of those sources had been 100% factual or 100% explanatory. They all had a vested interest in promoting their argument. That's what happens. But the argument of the vested interest to get rid of the order appeared to be better organised and stronger at the time. So the order placed the owners to pay the minimum rate on the hirer or consigner of goods, yet the catch cry was if we charge more, they'll stop using us or buy more trucks of our own. It'll lead to suicides, etc., etc. The order was no different to imposing a minimum wage for other workers in Australia. That's the effect of it. Just imposed a bottom ceiling so everyone had a minimum wage or an equitable rate to do the work they're employed to do. So it would have given the so-called bottom feeders a bigger slice of the pie. But I also went on to say that buying a truck is far too easy today, and it's today also. And with more and more people entering the industry, there is increased competition, and the safe rates, the RSO, could have helped operators improve efficiency. And the point I make on that now is that you often hear truck manufacturers saying, you know, it's a healthy new truck market. Volvo has sold this many trucks this month, and Kenworth has sold this many trucks. But what it doesn't highlight is this kind of perfect storm of the used truck market, because most of those new trucks are bought on the back of trade-ins. So those trade-ins then enter the used truck market, and that allows operators with very little experience, very little financial nous, to enter that contracting slice of pie. And a lot of people feel that as long as they've got a load on their truck, they're doing well. But there's a lot more to that. You have to have a load that pays its way, that allows you to make a little profit, allows you to make these regulatory payments, allows you to do regular servicing, all those sorts of things.
Rob, could I just come in there? I'm keen for us to ask a few questions, if I may, because I don't want to cut you off. We've got a fair bit to go through today. Can I just peel back a bit? And you're an employed driver.
Yep.
Now, there is the assumption in this nation that there's an organ out there called the minimum award, and depending on what class of vehicle you're driving, you get paid X amount of rupees per hour to turn up to work. Make sure you don't roll the bloody thing over and damage the freight.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so, and as you're saying to us very clearly, that's not the case. There is out there, but there is absolutely no enforcement of the minimum standards in this nation, correct?
Absolutely.
Right, so let's get this really, really clear. Because what we do know in the transport industry, there are many, many, many decent, hard-working men and women in the transport industry who have put their life, everything on the line. They have missed family functions. They've made all these sacrifices, going from drivers to owners, the whole lot. But the trouble is, if we're not having the minimum, and let me just put this on the record, Rob, I think the minimum standard rate for a truck driver is shit. I'm probably not allowed to put it that way. Maybe I'll retract it. It's absolute crap, okay? When a B-double driver, now this is not having to go at the owners, not at all, but because the owners they're not even making that half of them, because, you know, they're trying to do the right thing by their clients and their employees. So what is the rate for a B-double employed driver in this nation?
Well, there's different ways to put it, but I'll give you the minimum weekly rate. So if you're a B-double driver doing 38 hours a week, and I'm sure all the Senate understand what a B-double is, it's quite a large truck. It can potentially weigh up to 68 tonnes. It's, you know, they're a commonplace on the road, but it's a fair bit of responsibility. The minimum gross wage is $886 gross a week.
So put that into an hourly rate very quickly for other people out there. What are we talking, 23, 24?
23 bucks, roughly 23 bucks an hour. What
do you get at Macca's? There's a 15 and 16-year-old kid get at McDonald's. Don't worry about that.
It's been a long time since I was a 15 or 16-year-old boy.
Right, okay. All right. So you're in charge of, you know, a 60-odd tonne of freight moving up and down the highways. Okay, that's fine. So what you're saying very clearly, Robin, I know the work that you have been doing, that you have forwarded to me many, many examples where rates of pay are being offered way below that rate. And you've also forwarded to me examples of where companies, and we've got kilometre rates before we even start there. That opens up a whole new, treasure trove of irregularities too. But not only that is that happening out there in the marketplace, because these bottom feeders, as you have put it, are taking food off the table of the decent employers and the decent employees.
Exactly.
Okay. But if I was being underpaid under the minimum award, I've got nowhere to go. I had this belief that the Fair Work Ombudsman would fall over themselves to come to any employee who says I'm not being paid properly. Tell me what happens with your experience with the Fair Work Office or the Fair Work Ombudsman.
What generally happens is if you're a driver working for a transport company, you've looked at the award and you looked at your pay slip and you think, you know what, I'm not getting paid properly. The first hurdle you got is trying to bring that up with your boss. That is extremely intimidating. It's intimidating for most people in the workforce these days to say to their boss, I don't think you're paying me enough. But in the transport industry, That's the first hurdle you got. And then your boss will say, well, if you don't like it, there's the door, right? Or, you know what, you've got a brand new Kenworth T909 or whatever. What do you expect to get paid properly as well? There's all those sorts of things. But going past that, you then have to speak to the Fair Work Ombudsman. So there's a 1300 number, you sit on hold for half an hour and eventually you get to speak to someone.
And then what happens?
They'll generally be fairly, I wouldn't say uncooperative, but not particularly helpful. And then they'll say, well, if you like, you've got to apply for a mediation sort of conference. That costs you money.
So how much money does that cost?
I think it's about $70-something to lodge that.
Okay.
And then look, these aren't.
Oh, okay.
But that process alone defeats 95% of all truck drivers. Just navigating that, and I'm not denigrating truck drivers, and one of the great things about truck driving is someone who has very little education, either semi-illiterate, allows them the opportunity to make what could be called a reasonable living. But in navigating the complex Fair Work Commission, Fair Work Ombudsman, because most people don't even know the difference between the two, that defeats, like I said, 99% of people. And then say you do manage to navigate that, and then you come to what we call this consensual mediation process. So you then have a telephone mediation with an apparently independent person appointed by the Fair Work Ombudsman to try and negotiate an outcome. Say you've been sacked or you're not being paid. But
And they come for free?
Well, that's part of that fee you paid, right? Yeah, so that happens then. But then, again, there's no compulsion at all for your employee to even attend or even to reply to their request to attend. And when they get there, there's no compulsion, there's no orders made. It's simply, do you agree or you don't agree? And if you can't reach a resolution, the Fair Work Ombudsman will then give you what they call a ticket, which then allows you to make an application to the federal court for arbitration. That then enters the very specialised, expensive legal, which defeats the other 1% in general, that could go there. So my point with that, and I'm sorry for probably the overcomplicated answer, but the barriers to accessing any sort of redress are like 200 foot tall.
Okay. Carry on too, sorry.
Sorry.
I just wanted to get that out.
And
senators, please, Senator McDonald, Senator Hanson, if you have a question, please jump in.
So where I said, I'll go on to now about the Fair Work Ombudsman. So the fact that the order, the RSO, was written in legal terminology made it difficult for many, if not all, to comprehend all the factors involved. I said it's a pity that the order was written in legalese, the term I use, however, because it would have been difficult, if not impossible, for the average person to comprehend what it was saying. Even some of the politicians involved in the campaign against it appeared not to have understood it, even the ones that were solicitors in their past. So even they allegedly had trouble reading the legislation. So the confusion was heightened since the Fair Work Ombudsman was inexplicably silent during the initial phase of that RSRT thing, and they were tasked with creating awareness about the whole order, but they didn't do anything because they were silent. And I sort of said I raised doubt at the time whether the Fair Work Ombudsman's silence during debate was an operational shortcoming or an obligated silence. But anyway, that's gone by. So that there was a political, I'm trying to be apolitical there, but at the time there was a political basis to the whole argument.
Can I look, and Rob, if I may come in and yes, I understand, absolutely understand. So what this committee is actually, we're a unique committee in the Senate because we put the politics, we leave them at the door, and we try to achieve the best outcome for the Australian communities that we represent. In the short time we've got remaining, mate, before we move through to other witnesses, what do we need to do? Let's give us a snapshot. What does this industry need to be viable, safe and sustainable?
Okay. Well, that article, like I said, was written a number of years ago, but I feel that it's kind of was a prophecy almost. It leads us to where the industry is today. So we have over-regulation on the enforcement side.
This is state.
This
Federal, this is everywhere.
There is no federal law anymore relating to road transport. It's all a state issue. There is an argument, there is just kind of propaganda that it's a national law and it's this and that, but it is Queensland state law applied or adopted in some of the other participating jurisdictions, but not all of them.
Yep.
So it's very much a state-based issue. And long-distance truck drivers, because this is primarily what I'm talking about, the long-distance sector, operate across state borders. They operate all around Australia, so we have this confusing myriad of legislation that's applied differently depending who's pulled you over on the side of the road. But the end result is always excessive fines and then costs, and it's always the low-hanging fruit that pays that cost. They don't, even though there's allegedly chain of responsibility legislation, it's far easier to go after what I call the low-lying fruit, and the driver pays the cost. I personally I can't go too much into detail, but I've got a $54,000 fine for crossing a white line in New South Wales.
Now, anyone listening, truckies out there listening would know exactly what you're talking about, but those of us that aren't truckies, how the hell do you get a $54,000? I know you can't go into it too much, but can you give us some idea how a truck driver could cop a $54,000
because
fine?
The Transport Authority, especially in New South Wales, employ private solicitors to carry their prosecutions.
This is RMS?
They're no longer RMS. The RMS was dissolved in legislation in 2018 and now called Transport for New South Wales.
Okay.
They still look and smell and wear uniforms called RMS, but they no longer legally exist. But basically, they employ private solicitors who are on like a feeding frenzy for this work. It's very easy work. They don't collect any of the evidence. They don't prepare the brief. They simply get the brief that's handed to them by the Transport Authority, and they prosecute in court. So when you get inevitably convicted, because if you're a truck driver and you go to any court in Australia, you're guilty before you even enter the courtroom. It's very hard. There's kind of we're all seen as these murdering truck drivers out there terrorising every motorist on the road. So you then get, when you lose the case, this private solicitor hands up a cost order. So he gets his costs, even though you're being prosecuted by a taxpayer-funded organisation, you effectively have to pay for your own prosecution. And I just quickly make this claim. If you were charged with murder and went for a 6-month jury trial in the Supreme Court and were eventually found guilty at the end of it, and there was millions of dollars of costs and barristers and stuff, you wouldn't get a cost order against you. But if you're a truck driver trying to fight for your existence, you get these crushing cost orders that then pay for these solicitors' private boats and their kids' private school education.
And why is it different if someone like myself drive my car, I actually go through a red light, or I'm actually picked up for speeding or something like that? Why then, if I want to challenge that, I take in court and there's a fine for that? I don't get a cost order. So you're saying that because you're a truck driver, you actually, is this just New South Wales alone?
It appears to be a New South Wales based thing. These solicitors tender for this work. It's very lucrative, and they make enormous costs out of it on the back of hard-working truck drivers, and these cost orders are crushing.
So, being a truck driver, especially, I'm gobsmacked over what you get paid in a week. I really am. I had no idea, right? I'm learning this about the industry, truck driving. Glenn keeps encouraging me to get involved in this, and I am interested. I've to understand it far better. So if my question today is not right across everything, please understand that I am interested in learning this matter. But so you're saying that as a truck driver, if you're on this sort of wage, you can't afford to defend yourself.
No, you can't. If I go to a solicitor and say, look, I've got this traffic, this heavy vehicle national law matter, legal aid won't help you because they don't deal with traffic matters. Full stop.
What about the company? If you work for a company, will the company actually do anything, or is that your responsibility?
No, it's your responsibility. In fact, most drivers are too scared to tell the company what happened because that could probably lead to them being sacked.
I am aware that your laws vary in the different states. Like I've driven the truckies on the Burrumbara K runs a few times and spoken to truckies there. So, and so what they were saying is the laws is totally different. You travel over a state line, you know, you'll be picked up because of the load that you're carrying, the width of your truck, the travel, the speed that you're doing. And it has been raised with me that you need the national laws right across the whole of Australia so that you're not thinking which state are you in, what's the laws here. Is that what you
So if you were to say, if you were to ask me how can we fix this mess, right?
Yeah.
I would say that the states have to refer the power of the heavy vehicle national law. It's sort of a constitutional issue, but you'd understand that being in the Senate.
Yeah.
Is the feds currently don't have constitutional coverage of road transport. However, they do have constitutional coverage of interstate trade and commerce. So there is a pathway whereby the states could refer the power to enact the heavy vehicle national law and the power of the regulator to a Commonwealth legislation, and then the states could then act as delegated enforcement officers under the Commonwealth legislation. And as part of that, if they did that, I would recommend that the regulator then would form an independent tribunal where made up of stakeholders from the industry, including perhaps someone like myself, because the stakeholder argument is always, it's not very often that truck drivers get an actual say in what happens to them. So it has an independent tribunal whereby if you're prosecutor or issued a penalty notice by any one of these state sort of enforcement people, you can then apply to have the matter reviewed by this independent tribunal who look at the circumstances of it, look at whether it's in the public interest to prosecute, all those types of things, because this current method is absolutely crushing truck drivers.
So just bring me up to speed with this. Apparently, under the jurisdiction, there was a talk by the states to actually bring everyone online in the states with the laws. Is run under the Queensland jurisdiction at the moment. So Queensland has based it, but you've got the other states, Northern Territory, and I think it's Victoria, that haven't followed. They haven't come on board.
Victoria has. It's a really unusual situation. I understand I've only got limited time here, so I'll try not to make it too.
Yeah.
But it's Queensland. The law is drafted by the National Transport Commission, which is a federal body.
Yep.
They're tasked with drafting the legislation. They write it. They give it to the Queensland Parliament to enact. And then the other states either adopt or apply that legislation. So if you're a truck driver with a couple of trucks out the back of the Mallee, or Wimmera, or whatever it is down, and you'll never really embrace technology in your life, don't even look at emails really. You have to be in the situation in Victoria of knowing what Queensland law is doing at any given time, because the law says the Victorian law will be the Queensland law as amended from time to time, but that actual law is not sitting in the Victorian statutes. So you have to have this ridiculous situation if you're an operator in Victoria, knowing what's going on with Queensland law to know what you can do in Victoria. It's bizarre.
Well, it does sound bizarre.
It is bizarre, and hence too, Senator Hans, so you do know, West Australia, we've refused to be part of the heavy vehicle national law, and the Northern Territory is the same. And there's a myriad of reasons why predominantly what started that was the fatigue management in anomalies. And that's a whole new other thing.
The truck drivers in the eastern states have a extremely onerous and manifestly excessive enforcement regime, where if you drive in, and I lived in Western Australia for some time and drove road trains to out of Perth up to the Kimberleys and Pilbara and into Northern Territory. You basically drive till you're ready to go to bed at a reasonable time. You go to bed for the night, you get up the next morning, and then you drive again. I never once in the 4 years I lived there got pulled over or got any sort of harassment, and I basically went to bed every night.
Now, can I just come in there because, and I know because I was part of the working group when we did that, and we were determined we were not going to have the Eastern States regime. And there's room for tweaking, there's room for improvement, as is always the case. But more importantly, in the West, we consulted with the truck drivers. That's why it's designed far better than the Eastern States regime, and we're proud of that too. So, but just on that, Rob, I'm sorry we have really run out of time. But can I just clarify one thing, Senator Hanson? minimum award rate of the $23, $24 for a B double, I'm happy to say that there are a heck of a lot of truck drivers earning a lot more than that.
But that's the minimum.
But
that's
that is the minimum, but
minimum
what Rob has highlighted here, that's the minimum award. But the bigger problem we have is those that are employing under the minimum award, right, where we can have 36% differentiation in rates, what truck drivers are being paid. And when we go to a mining company or we go to a Coles or a Woolies or someone like that, and we start saying, as there's decent companies who are employing fantastically trained truck drivers and crew and that, lose contracts. You can understand why. And the ethical question is here, where is Coles and Woolies and the mining companies and BlueScope Steel? How the heck do they sleep at night? Because they're so proud of delivering dollars back to their taxpayers at the expense of decent employers employing decently trained and proper
I'll just make one
professional
point
truck drivers.
Closing for Senator Hanson's benefit. If you, for instance, went to a transport company and said, look, I've had this fella at the Senate inquiry saying he's on, and they'll say, look, our drivers make $80,000 a year, sometimes they even make $100,000 a year, right? And you'd be thinking, well, but just remember, they're doing 2 to 3 jobs a week to get that. So we're talking, most workers work 40 hours a week or whatever. Long distance truck drivers often work 100 plus hours a week, and they're away 7 days a week, working day and night, working far more hours than they're legally allowed to. And that, if you put that into perspective, on the surface of $100,000 a year might seem like a lot of money, but when you're doing two jobs, 2.5 jobs a week to get it, it's not.
On that, Rob. Yes, sorry, Senator Don. Yeah, please. Sorry.
I just want to go back. You made a comment earlier that you felt that truck drivers were seen as the, bad light, that they were dangerous or whatever. I mean, I want to assure you that in, regional Queensland anyway, that's not the case. We rely on truck drivers to move, ag and mining and all those things. So, just want to be very clear that not everybody thinks that, and certainly not those of us in Western Queensland. I did want to ask you though, you made a comment about the second-hand truck market. We rely on being able to buy trucks at an affordable rate to, move stock, move gear. So you're not saying that there's a problem with the second-hand market, you're saying it's a problem with people buying trucks cheap. I just want to clarify what you're talking about.
It's difficult to make generalisations because I understand that not all employees are bad employees, etc., and not all. But what the second-hand market does is, if you have a healthy new truck market, there's this ever-increasing pile of second-hand trucks, and yes, that allows people to buy trucks cheaper than a new one. But a lot of people see that, come up with this idea: I'm going to buy a truck, I'm going to be an owner-driver, but they have no idea what they're doing, and that causes problems because then they'll go in and cut rates to get work or work for inequitable rates. And that's just another dangerous kind of situation on the road. I certainly take on board what you're saying, but the new truck market, the second-hand truck market does cause its problems as well.
Okay, I get where you're going, and it's the price, the downward pressure on price for jobs.
And rates, yeah.
Thanks, Senator McDonald. Robert, thank you very much for your time. I do appreciate you making the effort. Sorry, we've got a tight ship to run today, but for those listening, Nat Roads will not be appearing today, unfortunately, with the COVID. The CEO of Nat Roads, who I was looking forward to hearing from, has a cold and he's not allowed to leave the ACT. So don't worry, we will fill the time. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you for your time.
Now, I'm going to call Mr. Trevor Warner.